What happens when one of Hollywood's brightest and most bankable stars walks into a studio expecting warmth, laughter, and a routine promotional chat only to find herself facing pointed questions that feel less like curiosity and more like accusation? That was the tension simmering beneath the surface when Margot Robbie appeared on The View, prepared to discuss her latest film and celebrate the creative journey behind it. The stage lights were warm, the audience eager, and the mood at first glance seemed inviting. Margot entered with her usual poise, wearing the confident smile that has become synonymous with her red carpet appearances and press tours. She waved graciously, exchanged pleasantries with the panel, and settled into her seat, clearly anticipating the familiar rhythm of an entertainment-focused interview. But from the moment the conversation began, something felt different. Instead of easing into questions about her preparation process, her collaboration with directors, or the themes of her new project, Behar shifted the tone abruptly. Leaning forward with a sharp, measured look, she framed her first major question in a way that caught both Margot and the audience off guard. Rather than praising her recent successes or acknowledging her critically acclaimed performances, Joy referenced detractors who claimed Margot was just another pretty face who got lucky in Hollywood. The phrasing hung heavily in the air, sharper than anyone expected for a mid-morning talk show segment. For a brief second, the room seemed to tighten. Margot's smile flickered, not disappearing entirely, but wavering just enough to reveal surprise. It was a human moment, subtle yet unmistakable. Still, she maintained her composure. Years in the spotlight had prepared her for scrutiny, but the bluntness of the comment felt unusually personal. This wasn't a question about craft, it was a challenge to her legitimacy. The audience murmured softly. Sensing the tension rising between guest and host, Margot adjusted slightly in her chair, her posture straight but calm. When she responded, her tone was measured and thoughtful. She acknowledged that criticism is part of any public career, especially in Hollywood, where appearances are often scrutinized as much as talent. However, she gently pushed back against the narrative that her success was merely luck. She spoke about her years of training, the auditions that never led anywhere, the early roles that required persistence and resilience. She reminded viewers that behind every so-called overnight success lies a decade of unseen effort. Her response was not defensive but grounded. She emphasized that she chooses roles carefully, often seeking complex characters that challenge stereotypes rather than reinforce them. From intense dramas to satirical comedies, she has consistently aimed to prove her range. She mentioned the long hours on set, the script rewrites, the physical transformations, and the emotional depth required to inhabit certain roles. Luck, she suggested, may open a door, but hard work keeps it open. Joy, however, did not immediately soften. The follow-up questions hinted at a deeper skepticism about Hollywood's standards of beauty, about privilege, about whether talent can ever be separated from image in an industry built on visuals. The exchange began to feel less like a promotion and more like a debate about merit and perception. Margot listened carefully, nodding at times, acknowledging broader issues within the industry. She agreed that Hollywood has historically favored certain looks and backgrounds, but she refused to let that general truth invalidate her personal dedication. As the discussion unfolded, the energy in the studio shifted again. What could have been a simple promotional segment turned into a broader conversation about sexism, image, and the assumptions placed on women in film. Margot pointed out that male actors are rarely reduced to their appearance in the same way. She spoke candidly about how being labeled beautiful can sometimes overshadow years of preparation and skill. Her words resonated with parts of the audience, who responded with supportive applause. Despite the tension, she never raised her voice. Instead, she leaned into clarity and self-assurance. She expressed gratitude for the opportunities she has received while firmly rejecting the idea that they were handed to her without merit. She highlighted the collaborative nature of filmmaking, acknowledging directors, writers, and crew members who push her to improve with every project. By the time she finished her explanation, the earlier accusation felt smaller, almost reductive in comparison to the broader picture she painted of her career. The confrontation, while not explosive in volume, was powerful in implication. It underscored how even established stars must continually defend their credibility. It revealed the fine line between critical inquiry and personal critique, and most importantly, it showcased Margot Robbie's ability to remain composed under pressure, transforming a potentially uncomfortable moment into an opportunity to articulate her journey and values. As the segment drew to a close, the atmosphere softened. There was no dramatic walk-off, no shouting match, just a lingering awareness that something real had transpired. What began as a routine appearance evolved into a conversation about perception, perseverance, and the complexities of success in Hollywood. Viewers were left debating not only the host's approach, but also the broader question: why is it still so easy to dismiss a woman's accomplishments by attributing them to luck or appearance? In the end, the exchange became more than a headline. It became a reminder that behind the glamour of film premieres and magazine covers lies a relentless demand for proof of talent, proof of effort, proof of worth, and in that moment, Margot Robbie didn't just promote a film. She quietly reaffirmed her place in an industry that often underestimates the very people who shape it. The conversation, which had already begun to feel strained, continued to unravel in ways no one in the studio had anticipated. Margot had just been explaining how fortunate she felt to collaborate with talented filmmakers and to tell stories that mattered to her, carefully choosing words that balanced gratitude with professionalism. But before she could complete her thought, Joy leaned forward again, her interruption sharp and unmistakably laced with sarcasm. "Fortunate, right?" Joy repeated, drawing out the word as if it carried a hidden accusation. "Must be nice to have doors open for you because of your looks rather than talent." The remark did not land softly. It hung in the air like a challenge thrown across a table. The other hosts shifted in their chairs, exchanging uneasy glances that suggested even they felt the sting of the comment. What had begun as a promotional appearance was now morphing into something far more confrontational. The audience, once animated with excitement, fell noticeably quieter. Margot's publicist, standing just off camera, stiffened from her vantage point. It was clear that the tone had changed. This was no longer a routine media engagement. It was becoming a pointed and potentially damaging exchange. Margot herself inhaled slowly, visibly steadying her breath before responding. She kept her posture upright, her hands folded loosely in her lap, though her fingers tightened ever so slightly. "I'm sorry," she began calmly, though there was a firmness beneath her polite tone. "I think there's some confusion. I've worked extremely hard to get here. I trained at drama school. I did independent films. I built my career step by step." She spoke deliberately, emphasizing each milestone as if laying bricks in a foundation. Her voice carried neither arrogance nor defensiveness, just clarity. She reverenced the years of preparation before the world ever knew her name. Long hours studying scripts, rehearsing scenes, performing in small productions that paid little but offered invaluable experience. She taught about auditions that led nowhere, casting calls that ended in polite rejections, and the constant uncertainty that shadows aspiring actors. But Joy waved her hand dismissively, as though brushing aside an excuse she had already decided not to accept. "Oh, spare me the rags to riches story," Joy said bluntly. "We all know how this industry works. Young, blonde, Australian. It's not exactly rocket science." A ripple of discomfort spread across the set. The comment felt less like social commentary and more like a personal jab. Whoopi attempted to step in, her voice measured as she tried to redirect the conversation. "Joy, maybe we should," but Joy cut her off mid-sentence. "No. It's important to have honest discussions about privilege in Hollywood. Some people work their whole lives without opportunities handed to them." The emphasis on handed was unmistakable. Margot's jaw tightened subtly. The polite smile she had maintained throughout the interview finally faded. Her eyes sharpened, reflecting not anger alone, but something deeper: frustration at being reduced to a stereotype. Hand it to me, she repeated, her tone now edged with disbelief. Do you know what I endured to land my first real role? The auditions, the rejections, juggling multiple jobs just to survive in Los Angeles? She spoke about sharing cramped apartments, living paycheck to paycheck, taking whatever work she could find while chasing auditions across the city. She described memorizing lines in between shifts, practicing accents in her car, and facing casting directors who barely looked up from their notes. None of that, she implied, felt like something handed to her. Boo-hoo, Joy interjected mockingly. Tell that to the countless talented actresses who never got a chance because they didn't fit the mold. The words felt harsh, almost dismissive of Margot's lived experience. The tension in the studio became palpable. Crew members avoided eye contact, focusing intently on their equipment as if trying to disappear into the background. The atmosphere had shifted from debate to confrontation. This was no longer just about Hollywood privilege. It had become personal. Margot leaned forward slightly, her composure still intact, but her emotion now unmistakable. Her Australian accent, usually softened for international interviews, became more pronounced as she spoke with intensity. You know what, Joy, she began, her voice steady but resonant. You're right about one thing, there is privilege in this industry. There are systemic issues. There are people who don't get the opportunities they deserve, but diminishing my work to nothing more than hair color and nationality doesn't solve that problem. Her words carried weight. She acknowledged the broader conversation without surrendering her own narrative. She explained that two realities can exist simultaneously, that Hollywood can be flawed and biased, and that she herself could have earned her place through relentless effort. She spoke about advocating for better representation, supporting female-led productions, and using her influence to back stories that challenge stereotypes. I didn't wake up one morning and find a career waiting for me, she continued. I fought for roles, I prepared, I failed, I tried again. And I'm proud of that. The studio remained silent except for the faint hum of cameras recording every second. Even the audience seemed uncertain whether to applaud or remain still. Joy crossed her arms, her expression unreadable, but the momentum of the exchange had shifted. Margot was no longer responding defensively. She was asserting her perspective with conviction. The conversation had evolved into a larger reflection on perception versus reality, on how quickly success can be dismissed when it fits a certain visual narrative. What made the moment powerful was not shouting or theatrics, but authenticity. Margot did not deny the existence of privilege, nor did she present herself as a victim. Instead, she challenged the simplification of her journey. She insisted that talent, discipline, and perseverance mattered, and that reducing her achievements to appearance alone was itself a form of unfair judgment. By this point, it was evident to everyone watching that the interview had gone far beyond a film promotion. It had become a live debate about merit, opportunity, and the narrative society assigns to women in entertainment. And in the center of it all sat Margot, no longer just a guest promoting a project, but an actress defending the years of unseen labor that built her career. As she finished her statement, the room felt different, charged, reflective, and undeniably tense. What had started as a conversation about a movie had transformed into something far more revealing. I came here expecting a respectful conversation about my work, Margot said, her voice steady but edged with unmistakable hurt. Instead, you're attacking me based on assumptions. The words seemed to echo in the studio. Assumptions. It was not shouted, not exaggerated, but it carried weight, years of effort compressed into a single defense. For a moment, the audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether the exchange would de-escalate or spiral further. Assumptions, Joy repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. It's called reality, sweetheart. Some of us have been in this business long enough to see how it really works. The condescension in the word sweetheart was impossible to miss. It wasn't just disagreement, it was dismissal. A subtle but deliberate attempt to shrink Margot's experience into something naive and undeserving of seriousness. Margot's composure wavered, but only slightly. She straightened in her seat, shoulders squared, chin lifted. And some of us, she replied, her tone firmer now, Have enough class to treat guests with basic respect. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The shift was undeniable. The exchange had crossed from professional tension into something deeply personal. Even the other hosts looked visibly unsettled, glancing between the two women as though calculating whether to intervene or allow the confrontation to play out. Joy's face flushed red, the color rising from her collar to her cheeks. Class? She shot back, leaning forward. You want to talk about class? Let me tell you about class. Little girl, I'm not your little girl, Margot said immediately, her voice cutting through the air with surprising force. I'm a grown woman who's worked hard for everything I've achieved, and I won't sit here while you tear me down for sport. The firmness in her response drew murmurs of support from parts of the audience. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't losing control, but the restraint in her voice only amplified the intensity of the moment. Joy leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, a thin, cruel smile forming on her lips. Oh, now you're the victim. That's rich. You come in with your designer dress and perfect hair, embodying everything wrong with Hollywood's beauty standards, and you want sympathy? Margot inhaled sharply. I want respect, she replied, her voice rising for the first time. The same respect you'd show any guest on this show. Respect is earned, Joy snapped. And frankly, I'm not impressed by someone whose biggest achievement is looking good in a bikini. The comment detonated in the room like a bomb. There was no mistaking the insult. It wasn't framed as critique. It was reducing years of work, creative risk, and professional dedication to a single superficial image. Margot's face shifted from pale shock to a deep flush of anger. Her hands clenched at her sides. How dare you reduce my career to that, she said, her voice trembling not with weakness, but with controlled fury. I've produced films, I've taken on challenging roles. I've worked with some of the industry's most respected directors. I've invested in stories that matter, she continued, her words gaining momentum. She spoke about stepping behind the camera as a producer, about championing female-driven narratives, about fighting for projects that might not have been greenlit without persistence. She described long nights rewriting scripts, collaborating with crews, and pushing herself into roles that demanded vulnerability and transformation. All thanks to your assumptions, Joy interrupted again, refusing to concede. That was the breaking point. Margot stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. The sharp sound echoed through the stunned silence. The audience leaned forward instinctively. This was no longer a tense interview, it was a public standoff. You know what? Margot said, her voice steady despite the visible tremor in her hands. I've had enough. This isn't journalism, it's bullying. Sit down, Joy commanded sharply. We're not finished. Oh, we're definitely finished, Margot replied, her controlled fury now unmistakable. I will not be spoken to like this by anyone, especially not by someone who's supposed to be a professional. The word professional lingered between them, heavy with implication. Joy's eyes narrowed. You want to see professional, she said, her voice low and dangerous. I've been doing this job since before you were born, princess. I've interviewed world leaders, covered major stories, made a career out of asking tough questions. I don't sugarcoat things to make celebrities comfortable, and I don't expect sugarcoating. Margot shot back, I expect fairness. Tough questions are about work, about choices, about ideas, not personal insults disguised as commentary. The studio felt frozen in time. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every flicker of expression, every sharp inhale, every stunned reaction from the panel and the crowd. Crew members exchanged anxious glances, aware that this segment would likely dominate headlines by evening. Margot's voice softened slightly, but her resolve did not. You can challenge me about my roles. You can question my decisions. You can debate the industry. But when you dismiss my entire career as the result of how I look, that's not insight. That's prejudice, Joy scoffed, though the confidence in her expression seemed to falter for just a fraction of a second. This conversation was supposed to be about a film I poured my heart into. Margot continued, about the artists who worked tirelessly on it, about the message we're trying to share. Instead, it's become about tearing down a woman because it's easier than acknowledging her work. The audience, which had been silent for much of the confrontation, began to clap hesitantly. The applause wasn't thunderous, it was cautious. Almost unsure, but it signaled that the mood had shifted. Joy opened her mouth as if to respond, but the moment had already changed. What began as a critique had escalated into an unmistakable clash of generational perspectives, professional philosophies, and personal boundaries. Margot took a final look at the panel, her expression resolute. "I respect tough interviews," she said quietly, "but I won't participate in being humiliated for entertainment." With that, she turned slightly, still standing tall, signaling that she was prepared to walk away if necessary. The atmosphere in the studio felt heavy, charged with the realization that something unprecedented had just unfolded live on air. What started as a promotional appearance had transformed into a debate about dignity, professionalism, and the line between criticism and cruelty. And in that charged moment, it was no longer just about Hollywood or beauty standards, it was about self-respect and the refusal to be diminished. The words sliced through the studio with unmistakable contempt. There was no attempt to disguise the insult as critique this time. It was blunt, deliberate, and meant to wound. For a split second, the air itself seemed to disappear from the room. The audience froze. Even the co-hosts looked stunned by how far the exchange had gone. That was the last straw. Margot's composure, which she had guarded carefully throughout the escalating confrontation, finally cracked. The polite restraint, the measured tone, the careful phrasing gone. When she spoke again, her voice was sharp and unwavering, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You want to know what I've done?" she demanded. There was no tremor now, no attempt to soften her words for the sake of decorum. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto Joy with fierce clarity. "I've conducted myself with dignity," she continued, emphasizing every syllable, "something you clearly know nothing about. I've used my platform to highlight important stories. I've produced meaningful films. I've worked to create opportunities for other women in this industry." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by equal parts anger and conviction. She listed her efforts behind the scenes, developing scripts that centered complex female characters, championing projects that might not have been considered commercially safe, collaborating with emerging filmmakers who needed a chance. She spoke about advocating for pay equity, about ensuring safer working environments, about choosing projects that challenged stereotypes rather than reinforcing them. Joy scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes in exaggerated disbelief. "Oh, please, spare me the Saints Act. You're just another Hollywood hypocrite." "Hypocrite," Margot repeated, her eyes blazing now. "You sit there preaching about women supporting women, about empowerment, about breaking barriers, while tearing me apart on national television for no reason other than your own bitter jealousy." The word jealousy landed like a physical blow. Joy's face twisted instantly, her expression contorting with rage. "Jealous of you?" she snapped. "Don't flatter yourself, honey. I was breaking barriers and making waves when you were still playing with dolls. And now you're tearing down women who are trying to do the same thing." Margot fired back without hesitation. "You want to talk about what's wrong with this industry? Look in the mirror. You're part of the problem." The accusation hung heavy in the air. The studio audience, which earlier had reacted with gasps and murmurs, now sat in absolute silence. It was no longer just tense, it was combustible. Ruby leaned forward, clearly recognizing that the situation was spiraling out of control. "Ladies, maybe we should take a breath," she suggested carefully, her voice calm but firm. "No," Joy interrupted sharply. "I'm tired of pretending talentless pretty faces deserve the same respect as people who've actually earned their place." The cruelty of the statement stunned even the most seasoned members of the production crew. Cameras continued rolling, but several staff members exchanged anxious glances, aware that this confrontation was crossing lines that might not be easily undone. Margot's publicist frantically gestured from offstage, signaling for restraint, perhaps even for Margot to disengage entirely. But Margot no longer seemed concerned about optics or damage control. Something deeper had taken over, a refusal to accept humiliation in silence. Talentless. Margot echoed, letting out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. You want to talk about talent? At least I don't make a living by being nasty to people. On television, at least I create something positive instead of tearing others down for ratings. The audience reacted with a mixture of shock and nervous energy. Some shifted in their seats. Others leaned forward, transfixed by the rawness of the moment. Joy's voice rose to a near shriek. I've been in this business for decades, she shouted. Decades. I've earned my credibility. I've built a career on telling the truth. Telling the truth, Margot shot back. Or hiding behind truth as an excuse to belittle people. The confrontation had moved far beyond disagreement. It was now a clash of philosophies, two fundamentally different views of what power and platform should be used for. Joy saw herself as a veteran commentator unafraid to challenge celebrity culture. Margot saw herself as an artist defending her integrity against personal attacks, masquerading as commentary. You think because you've been here longer, you get to decide who deserves respect, Margot continued, her voice steady despite the visible emotion in her expression. Longevity doesn't excuse cruelty. Joy's breathing was heavy now, her anger unmistakable. Cruelty? I'm holding up a mirror to an industry built on image. If you don't like what you see, that's not my fault, but you're not criticizing the industry, Margot replied firmly. You're attacking me. There's a difference. The silence that followed felt endless. The studio lights seemed harsher, the atmosphere thicker. Every person present understood that this wasn't just another heated celebrity interview. It was a public collision of ego, ideology, and pride. Margot's voice softened slightly, but the intensity remained. You talk about breaking barriers, about fighting for women to be taken seriously. Yet the moment a woman stands in front of you who doesn't fit your narrative of struggle, you tear her down. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Margot continued, you don't know the sacrifices I've made. You don't know the failures I've endured. You don't know the risks I've taken. You see a dress, a hairstyle, a headline, and you decide that's the whole story. The audience, still silent, seemed caught between disbelief and admiration at her refusal to back down. I've spent years building something meaningful, Margot said, and I won't let you reduce it to a swimsuit photo or stereotype. Joy shook her head, visibly seething. You're too sensitive. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be here. Tough questions are about ideas. Margot replied evenly, not insults about appearance. The exchange had become deeply personal, but it also revealed something broader. The fragile line between critique and contempt, between challenging power and abusing it. The studio remained frozen in collective anticipation. No applause, no laughter. Just the hum of cameras capturing a moment that would undoubtedly be dissected and debated long after the broadcast ended. Two women stood at opposite ends of the stage, one defending decades of commentary, the other defending years of creative labor, neither willing to concede, neither prepared to apologize. And in that charged silence, it was clear that this confrontation had transcended entertainment. It had become a battle over respect, legacy, and who gets to define worth in an industry built on perception.